Hi class, welcome to our last video lesson of Chapter 2. We're on 2-8, Angle Relationships. As I talk about angle relationships, let me show you what this graphic looks like. First of all, we have adjacent angles. Let's say I call this angle 1, angle 2, angle 3, angle 4. Notice how angle 2 and angle 4 are both 60 degrees. Angle 1 and angle 3 are both 120 degrees. So that's the first thing I want you to notice. The second thing I want you to notice is what is the sum of angle 1 and angle 2? It's 180 degrees. How about the sum of angle 2 and angle 3? Again, 180, angle 3 and angle 4, 180, angle 1 and angle 4, 180. So when two angles add up to equal 180 degrees, we call those two angles supplementary. So let's see what happens as I change the degrees of these angles. Instead of 60, 60, 120, 120, let's see what happens. So as I move my vertex C, or I move my vertex A, for example, notice how the angles change, certainly, but notice what happens to the vertical angles. They're still 108.8, 108.8 for angle 1 and angle 3. Angle 2 and angle 4 are both 71.2. So I can move these points however I want to. I can make the angles very acute and very obtuse like I'm trying to do right now. Notice how it's 13.7, 13.8 degrees, very acute, 166.2 degrees, again very acute, or sorry, very obtuse, but the vertical angles are always going to be congruent. No matter what I do to these points here, my vertical angles are always going to be congruent. And the other thing I want you to notice, no matter what I do, the adjacent angles are always going to be supplementary, which means that they form a linear pair. So this angle right here and this angle right here are always going to add up to form 180 degrees because that's a line. So I can move the points any way I want to, but bottom line is the adjacent angles are always going to be supplementary. The vertical angles are always going to be congruent. One more picture to show you here. What I want you to notice here is that this point right here is point D. ADB is 90 degrees, and so that means angle ADC is also 90 degrees. It's 45 degrees plus 45 degrees, right? 45 plus 45 is 90. Now, what happens if I take my point E and I take line DE and I move it, so on and so forth? I make the angles different. Now I have a 13.7 degree angle and a 63.7 degree angle. What is the sum of 76.3 and 13.7? It's 90 degrees. No matter what I do to point E right here, it's going to change the degrees of angles ADE and EDC, but the sum is always, always, always going to be 90 degrees. So when two angles add up to equal 90 degrees, we call them complementary angles. So that kind of leads into the lesson for today and defining the very first few slides that we're going to be talking about. If two angles form a linear pair, so a linear pair are adjacent angles that form a straight angle, they are going to be supplementary. They're going to add up to equal 180 degrees. The two angles, they could be a host of different measures, but bottom line, if one of them is 140, the other one is 40. If one of them is 100, the other one is going to be 80, because the two have to add up to equal 180 degrees. That's what supplementary means. If two angles form a right angle, which is 90 degrees, we would then say that they are complementary angles. If two angles add up to equal 90 degrees, which is a right angle, they are complementary. If two angles are supplementary or complementary to the same angle or congruent angles, then they are congruent is the answer for this one. So here's like an example right here. If angle 1 and angle 3 are supplementary, let's just fill in a number just to make this slide make a little more sense. Let's say one is 60 and the other is 120. And angles 2 and 4 are supplementary, and 3 and 4 are congruent angles. So if 3 and 4 are congruent angles, if 3 is 120, 4 is 120. Well, now what does angle 2 have to be? Angle 2 and angle 4 are supplementary, so that means angle 2 has to be 60 degrees. So then it would say angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent. Well, of course they are. If 1 and 3 are supplementary and 2 and 4 are supplementary, if angle 3 and angle 4 are the same, then angles 1 and angles 2 have to be the same. So that's what that slide is saying. Last thing here before we get into our problems for today, if two angles are vertical angles, we saw this on the activity at the beginning of the video, vertical angles are always going to be congruent. They're going to equal the exact same measure. So look at this one, 5x plus 50 and 11x minus 70, they are vertical angles. So this angle would be congruent to this angle. If two angles are congruent, we would say they have an equal measure. So they have an equal measure. 5x plus 50 has an equal measure to 11x minus 70. Now we're going to use algebra to solve. We'll subtract 5x and add 70. So 120 equals 6x. And now we divide both sides by 6. And we get x to equal 120 divided by 6 is 20. So this isn't our answer. X equals 20, but our directions, let's find the measure of all four angles. So this angle right here is 5 times x plus 50. And 5 times 20 plus 50, 5 times 20 is 100, and 100 plus 50 is 150 degrees. This angle, the vertical angle, is 11x minus 70, and 11 times 20 minus 70, 11 times 20 is 220, minus 70 is 150 degrees. Isn't that something? Isn't that something that the vertical angle is congruent to it? It should happen that way, right? So both those two angles are 150. So how in the world am I going to find the measure of this angle and this angle? Well, they form a linear pair with 150 degrees, right? So that means it's supplementary. This angle has to be 30 degrees, and then vertical angles are congruent, so that one has to be 30 degrees as well. Or these two form a linear pair, so they have to be supplementary. These two form a linear pair, so they have to be supplementary. So several different ways that you could find the answers for those ones. Last problem, angles 1 and angles 2 form a linear pair. The measure of angle 1 is x minus 4. The measure of angle 2 is 2x minus 5. Find the measure of angle 1 and angle 2. I'm just first going to draw this one out so we can get a picture. A linear pair are two angles that form a line. So there's a line, and I'm going to draw a ray right here, which would now create two angles. So angle 1 is x minus 4. I'll just say this one is x minus 4. The other one is 2x minus 5. And linear pairs are supplementary. So that means they add up to equal 180 degrees. They add up to equal 180 degrees. So that's how we're going to set this one up to solve. X minus 4 plus 2x minus 5. That sum is supplementary. It equals 180 degrees. Let's solve for x, shall we, everybody? 1x plus 2x is 3x's. A negative 4 and a negative 5 make a negative 9. That equals 180. Add 9 to both sides. 3x equals 189. Divide both sides by 3. 189 divided by 3 is 63. So we found x. X is 63, but that's not our answer. Our directions say let's find the measure of angle 1 and find the measure of angle 2. Angle 1 is x minus 4. So 63 minus 4, and 63 minus 4 is 59 degrees. There's one of our answers. Angle 2, let's substitute 63 back in. It's 2 times 63 minus 5. So 2 times 63 is 126 minus 5. 126 minus 5 is 121 degrees. That is the measure of angle 2. And notice angle 1 and angle 2, it doesn't take very long to check your work. They should be supplementary. So if you add up 121 plus 59, you should get 180 degrees, which you do. I hope this video is helpful. Please make sure you ask me questions if you have any when you get to class tomorrow.